Online, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very glad to welcome today Ambassador Ronald Barnes. He's the representative of the indigenous peoples of Alaska before the United Nations in Geneva. He will also be the chair of this panel. He's here today on behalf of the International Human Rights Association of American Minorities and also of indigenous peoples and nations coalitions of Alaska. We're here today to talk about Fukushima discharge of contaminated water. Mr. Ambassador Barnes, I leave the floor to introduce you panelists. We have one distinguished panelist here and also other panelists online. I give the floor. Thank you for being here today.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Director. Today we're going to raise questions about the Fukushima discharge in the context of human rights and the right of peoples. The announcement by Japan to discharge Fukushima nuclear wastewater, which has been treated in the Pacific Ocean, which was dispersed on the 13th of April, discussed 13th April 2021, has generated discussions amongst scientists, legal scholars, political scholars, human rights and environmental groups. And this dump has drawn concerns from many people around the world, including, as we know, the International Atomic Agency and the World Health Organization agreed that Japan had satisfied the requirements for safety and that they diluted the tritium to an extent that it is acceptable for their standards. However, in today's world and geopolitics, we have a myriad of environmentalists and climate change activists and people who are protecting our oceans. And this needs to be examined. We have a large number of scientists from the United States of America, and we have the head of the 18-nation Pacific Island Forum, which includes Australia, New Zealand, and other island nations. They expressed concern, and they would like that in order to consent, they want to fully examine the data, which is, they believe, other scientists, as they have the same concern. This data has not been properly examined, and they have not agreed to this. So they say that their region is steadfast in their position. There should be no discharge until all parties agree through scientific means, and they all believe that the discharge is safe. And this comes from Foreign Secretary Henry Puna. Who are some of the scientists that do disagree? The U.S. National Association of Marine Laboratories, an organization of more than 100 laboratories in the United States of America, also expressed opposition to the plan, saying that there was a lack of adequate and accurate scientific data supporting Japan's assertion of safety. And of course, the International Human Rights Association of American Minorities gave an intervention on item 4 during this 54th session of the Human Rights Council. And what we said is that this needs to be monitored by several international agencies, including by WHO, working with UNESCO, also with the FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization, and also with UNEP and others, especially civil society from Japan, from around the Pacific. What we are asserting from Alaska and Hawaii, as our concern has been raised several times now at the United Nations, at the second cycle Universal Periodic Review of United States of America, Pakistan had recommended that Alaska and Hawaii be sent to the United Nations Decolonization Committee for review. We also have the distinguished Professor Alfred de Zayas, who is formerly the independent expert on the promotion of a democratic and equitable international order. He also recommended we be sent to the UN Decolonization Committee, and he went further than that. He said we should be participating equally with states at all events and with all issues that concern us. And when we reviewed some of the diplomatic discussion prior to the removal of Alaska and why under General Assembly Resolution 1469 in 1959, we discovered that several states were concerned that the United States did not administer us. They said there's racial discrimination, and they said that it's very clear that when the United States refused to administer us, they had granted white privilege, political advancement, economic advancement to the white race in Alaska. And of course, Alfred de Zayas did a memo on this, saying that the 1823 J.V. McIntosh case said that we had to adhere to the superior genius of the European civilization. And of course, in 1955, 4 years prior to our removal, that Alaska was for the settlement of the white race. So it's clear apartheid. Now we have journalists who are beginning to report on the apartheid that continues to exist in Alaska. As such, there were some states who said people such as us, if they would have properly examined our case, the United States should have presented our legal history, they should have presented the original status, they should have presented the geography, and all this other information where they could not claim Article 2, Paragraph 7 of the United Nations Charter, stating that we fall within the domestic sphere of a state. We clearly fall outside the domestic sphere of the state, since Alaska and Hawaii were both considered independent from United States of America and originally from Russia. So, what are we seeking here? We would like to further review and promote that these Pacific Island states and other states, as well as the scientists, are able to be heard equitably, not only given preference to the scientists from Japan, from the United States, from those states who sit and are given power, some states, though they will not say it openly, hegemonic power over other states, that is denying their equal participation, making a decision that in fact is inequitable and needs to be further reviewed, and that we need to move this forward. So, our first speaker, if you have him, is Mr. Hisashi Saito from Japan, from Juventium. He is one of the civil society from Japan, but he knows some of the background of the story from the original Fukushima leak in 2011, and then some of the story behind locals in Japan, including the fish industry. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Hisashi Saito.
Do you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hello? Hello, everybody.
Yes.
Yes. Well, I thought I was speaking a little bit later, but hello, everyone. My name is Hisashi Saito. I represent an educational NGO for sustainability, Juventum, to the UN and WTO. And we have UN ECOSOC status. And yeah, our interest includes the environment, climate change, sustainable development, education, and human rights in general. And I appreciate the organizers of this event for inviting me. It is my honor to participate. And concerning Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant disaster, we have been looking into the issue of the radiation health damage and human rights. I made numerous statements in the HRC and UPR sessions. We submitted our inputs and suggestions for the UPR of Japan in 2017 and 2022. I have some scientific background in the fields, mainly in chemistry and biology. I used to work as a molecular biologist, mainly in biotechnology field. And probably more importantly, I understand that being a Japanese who can speak English is an important reason here, while you already have so many other good experts in the world, including scientists opposing this radioactive discharge from Fukushima. So I would like to do my best in my role here, adding some of my personal views and perspectives. I would love to hear your questions and the comments during and after this event. And Japan is a highly linguistically isolated space, and not all information and nuances within are known to the rest of the world. So about individual facts, you can also hear from so many good other experts too. So before getting here, I just want to mention a few things that you may find a little bit unrelated, but it is actually really seriously, it's a root of the whole thing. So first, I would like you to have a look at the very old story called An Enemy of the People, and Folkefiende in Norwegian, a theater play published by Henrik Ibsen in 1882. 3 years before, in 1879, much more famous Doll's House was published, and most people know Ibsen for this work. You can say that they were published at almost the same time in history, and if you look at the two different human rights issues in contrast, it may help you understand. So the gender issues made a reasonable improvement, as you can see now, but the pollution in this world is simply has become worse and worse since then. Rio de Janeiro Declaration stipulates PP and the PPP. PP here is a precautionary principle, and the PPP is a polluters pay principle, not the public-private partnership in some meetings. So polluters pay principle. And the HR here is not human resources, it's a human rights, okay? So this is very important. And then we find the environment in the title word of MDGs 7, previous UN goals. But SDGs carefully managed to remove the word environment from the title words of the goals. This was a serious defeat. And for the next goals or any future UN goals, we should keep this in mind, that the word environment used in UN context accompanies responsibility. So you really cannot skip this word, like happening in SDGs. So this was really awful. And so then let me mention something, some of the things happening in Japan. And it's, so if you say contaminated water discharge in Japan, then they don't like you. So the media is heavily controlled from behind. So Japan's freedom of journalism indexed by the organization called Reporters Without Border, and it was 11th in the world in 2010, but now it's a 68th. Once it was 74th. So it is the very worst among G7 nations. And you can expect what kind of things they want you to believe. So if you say contaminated water, maybe you're representing a foreign interest. And then you have to say treated water. So former agricultural minister got into trouble because he said contaminated water in Japanese. That's osenshi. And treated water is a shorisi. Such a word that was not that common before this happened. So then, so you can call the same water in many different ways. You can say treated water, or you can say contaminated water, or you can say nuclear contaminated water, or you can say Alps treated radioactive wastewater, or diluted Alps treated radioactive wastewater. So yeah, the word Alps sounds like a beautiful mountain, but it is advanced liquid processing system. So advanced liquid processing system doesn't explain anything. So basically there's a black box, you pour some dirty water and the cleaner water come out. That's the way that most of the Japanese people can understand. Then the safety issue was totally replaced by Japan versus mainly China because fishery product trade was blocked. And then there are a few harassment phone calls rung from China. So these things are overemphasized in the media, and then all these important safety issues are gone. And as Ronald mentioned, that the fishery organizations in Japan, they are totally opposing. And the majority of local communities in Fukushima prefecture, they're opposing. And however, there was they just simply bulldozed these fishery organizations' opposition, and then without the proper explanation, they just started dumping this water. So the problem is that now they call it the support for the fishermen with the money to combat reputation damage. And whether it is a reputation damage or real damage, we cannot see so clearly, because this is something you are spreading the whole thing to the Pacific Ocean, almost saying like, solution to pollution is dilution. And and then as a Japanese citizen, I feel really ashamed that this happened, and I really have to say sorry. But there are many activists trying to stop this and working really hard. But unfortunately, I don't see anybody's ordinary people are not really paying attention to this issue. So actually, the second discharge started Thursday last week, but there's no media attention. So most of the people, they just simply don't know. And then maybe they are thinking that it somehow stopped, or maybe, I don't know, they have no idea if they are asked. And then this will be dumped at least for 30 years, they say, the government says. But the source of this water is keep increasing from the groundwater flow. So it may take 50 years or 60 years, and by the time it ends, nobody around here is alive. So it is very difficult. And then for the future, I really think that we need to have, so media control is probably the biggest challenges in the fight against any kind of pollution, and in this case, very obviously. And all these safety propaganda, but lack of data, lack of safety data, or almost intentional lack of data is not a proof of safety. This is something we have to keep in mind, and we must stick to the precautionary principle in terms of the discussion on pollution, and not like until found guilty, you're innocent. Well, it is highly likely to harm us, and so yeah, precautionary principle. And finally, we have to oppose the nuclear energy in general. There's no place in the climate action, and the less than 1/3 of the nuclear reaction energy is actually converted into electricity. The more than 2/3 is simply heating the planet. And then all the waste coming out, there has been no real solution. And in Japan, they also try to disperse the soil contamination throughout the country. And this was a discussion, but we don't hear that much anymore. So it is quite tough. And so we wish that we can be more well connected to the rest of the world, and we can have a real scientific discussion and without influence by propaganda. So thank you very much for your attention, and I would love to take any questions later.
Thank you very much, Mr. Saito. And I appreciate when I see you intervening at the Human Rights Council and speaking and raising the issue so that more NGOs and other people can ask questions and raise the question more that there are many scientists who do not agree, and states. And so this is what we need to continue to relay to the general population, and to say that politically, this is everybody's world, it's our world. Okay, our next speaker is my good friend, Mr. Alfred Desais. He's professor at the Geneva School of Diplomacy and International Relations. And as I stated, he's previously the independent expert on the promotion of a democratic and equitable international order. And he's well versed in some of these issues and agreements that could be drawn into question as to whether or not the scientists and everyone came together, including the people, our people. As it says, the United Nations is about we, the peoples, nations large and small, so we all have the right to a voice here. Mr. Desais.
Thank you very much. First of all, my appreciation to the Geneva Press Club for making this conference possible. And my thanks to Ronald and to Hisashi Saito. And I don't know whether Leon is going to join us later on. Excellent, I'm looking forward to that. Well, you probably don't know, 30 years ago I was professor in Chicago. I was visiting professor of international law. And among the courses I taught was international environmental law. And I always started with the Trail Smelter case and with the principle, the polluter pays. But I always said I'm not quite convinced about just the polluter pays, because that is ex post facto. It's the same thing with international criminal law. I never liked the idea of the international penal court and all of these things, because it comes always after the fact. I think the principle of precaution is far more important thing. It's a lot more important to prevent war than to go and prosecute someone for the crime of aggression. So what you have to do is to address the root causes of the problem and always trying to avoid irreparable damage. And that occurs in war, as it does in the environment. Once you have started a war, war crimes and crimes against humanity are going to follow. You're not going to stop it. And once you have a problem of nuclear pollution, let's not forget that Pacific Islands already suffered enormously from this orgy of nuclear testing on their ground, and that whole areas of the Pacific were polluted for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So our concern with Fukushima and the discharge of contaminated water is that we don't know exactly what's going to happen. We know that the Chinese and the South Koreans are already monitoring that. They're trying to see the level of contamination that may be found in seafood, that may be found in fish, that may be found in the water itself. And let's not forget, there's such a thing called currents. And ocean currents are going to bring this pollution all over the world. Now, how intense that is, etc., that is for experts to determine. But I would prefer to prevent it than to say, oh, well, we made a mistake, and then we have to fix that mistake. In my 6 years as independent expert, I produced 14 reports. Ronald is right that I addressed the issue of indigenous in North and South America and in the Pacific Islands, in Rapa Nui and West Papua, and obviously Hawaii and Alaska. And I said that the right, not the principle of the right of self-determination is actually democracy, as democracy is self-determination. And that self-determination is and must be prioritary over matters of territorial integrity, et cetera, et cetera. So addressing the issue of pollution also touches the issue of self-determination. Obviously, it touches the issue of the right to food and the right to clean water and sanitation, and the prohibition of a discharge of toxic chemicals. We have a UN rapporteur on each one of those subjects, and they should be addressing this issue seriously. But one of the problems with our system of independent experts is that not all of them are independent. Our system of special rapporteur is that many, I hate to admit it, but many of my colleagues are either in the service of Washington or in the service of Brussels. So we still have a neo-colonial atmosphere in the Human Rights Council, and many of these issues that are crucial, like issues of the right to development, issues of the Millennium Development Goals, of the Sustainable Development Goals, they are not the cup of tea of Washington and Brussels. So when you get a resolution in the Human Rights Council concerning these issues, either they're downplayed, they are watered down, or in the end, the US and the EU will vote against them. So right now at this session, yesterday, the Council renewed the mandate of the independent expert on international order. I was the first independent expert. My good friend Livingston Sewanyana is my successor, and he has also produced a dozen reports for the Council. He's done a good job. As the case may be, you should have heard the disgraceful, absolutely disgraceful statement by the representative of the EU, that was the ambassador from Belgium. that, the mandate had no raison d'etre and that the mandate had exhausted its utility, et cetera, et cetera. So he voted against it. And of course, the US voted against it. But it went through, 31 in favor, 13 against, that's 3 abstentions. In any event, it's one of the most important mandates, I consider. And I produced, as I said, 14 reports, and then I made a synthesis of my 14 reports in my book, The Building a Just World Order, Clarity Press, Atlanta, Georgia, 2021. This is the first of a trilogy. The second book is called Countering Mainstream Narratives, and the third book, which just came out 3 months ago, is called The Human Rights Industry. Of course, I could have called it The Business of Human Rights, or I could have called it something else. I thought of calling it United Nations Human Rights Monitoring Mechanisms, but I'm actually the editor of a book with that title, so I couldn't reuse that title. And I thought that what was important is to indicate to the innocent observer that the human rights system, as important as it is, as crucial as it is, has been hijacked. That the level of double standards and selectivity in the Human Rights Council and also in the General Assembly, the level of bullying, the level of blackmail, the level of arm twisting is spectacular. So that you can, if you have a genuine case, it's not certain that you're going to get a resolution adopted on your favor because the political pressures, the horse trading, the geopolitical game is just simply more important than whatever you're trying to push. Now, one correction that I wanted to say, because the press actually has misused, deliberately misused, the, shall we say, statement made by the International Atomic Energy Agency about the cleaning up of the waters, giving the wrong impression that it really is safe. Now, there's a disclaimer, and from none other than Rafael Mariano Grossi, the Director General of the IAEA, and I quote, "The release of the treated water as opposed to contaminated water, stored at Fukushima's Daiichi power station is a national decision by the government of Japan, and this report is neither a recommendation nor an endorsement of that policy." So this is the classical disclaimer. So he said, well, no, I'm not responsible for this. This reminds me a bit of Luis Almagro's after all he did for the coup d'etat against Evo Morales in 2019, that then he tried to wash his hands of responsibility. And, this is pretty criminal. But this is the way the game is being played. So don't be naive about it. In my 25 Principles of International Order, which, of course, the principal concern of mine and the principal concern of the United Nations organization as such is the preservation of peace. So, the first of my 25 principles is Pax Optima Rerum. Peace is the highest good, and the organization and all of the UN agencies must be devoted primarily to the prevention of war and any structural violence and outbreak of hostilities. But I also address the issue of the environment and of ecocide. That, by the way, is a development, a positive development in the international law field and in the human rights field. I dare say there have been more positive developments than negative developments. But as there is progress, there's also retrogression, and I'll talk about retrogression later on. But I do applaud the fact that the General Assembly has recognized the environment as a human right, that just now the International Court of Justice has to issue an advisory opinion on climate change and also on the impact on the environment and human rights. So slowly but surely is being recognized by the international community that the environment is a human right. Now, Principle 20 of my 25 principle reads as follows. States have a duty to protect and preserve the natural environment and the common heritage of humankind. The crime of ecocide entails the irreversible degradation or destruction of the human environment. It constitutes a crime against humanity that must be suppressed by the international community and prosecuted under Article 7 of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. The problem is that the International Criminal Court is a tool of the West. I mean, I lost all hope for the International Criminal Court after the new prosecutor, Karim Khan, decided, he was going to discontinue the investigations about U.S. and NATO war crimes in Afghanistan, but he was going to continue the investigation of war crimes committed by the Taliban. No question, the Taliban committed horrible crimes, but I think that the NATO is not far behind, if not one better than what the Taliban did. Now, it destroys the credibility, it destroys the authority of the International Criminal Court when it's not being objective, when it has double standards, when it picks and chooses. And no question, the war, or rather the invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 by Russia constituted the crime of aggression for purposes of Article 5 of the Statute of Rome. And it would also fall within the scope of Article 6A of the Nuremberg Statute. That was the crime against peace. It would fall under the precedent of the Nuremberg judgment of 1946. On the other hand, how many wars of aggression have there been since 1945? Literally hundreds. And if you prosecute Putin for this undoubtedly violation of Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the UN Charter, I mean, the use of force, totally contrary to international law, but that you also have to prosecute the likes of Tony Blair and George W. Bush and Paul Wolfowitz, and let's not forget, a couple of weeks ago, Ilham Aliyev, the president of Azerbaijan, committing a huge crime against peace, against the people of Azerbaijan. Also the continuation of the genocide against the Armenians conducted by the Ottoman Empire from 1915 through 1923, Ottoman Empire and Kemalist Turkey, not just Mehmed VI, the last sultan. As the case may be, you would have to prosecute Ilham Aliyev, you would have to prosecute Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, for his crimes against the people of Yemen. You definitely would have to prosecute Benjamin Netanyahu, not just for the atrocities that are being committed at this moment, today, against the people of Gaza, but you have to prosecute them for all the prior crimes committed against the people of Gaza. So what is the credibility of the International Criminal Court if the International Criminal Court just simply wants to go after the enemies of the West and leaves everybody else in total impunity? But then, going back to the crime of ecocide, I think that many countries can and should be prosecuted under Article 7, because the destruction of the environment and the consequences that that carries for generations and generations is really a crime against humanity. But in order to reach that conclusion, you need information. And my principle number 23 of the 25 Principles of International Order, which, by the way, I presented them to the Human Rights Council in March 2018. And there was very little discussion, very little follow-up on them. That's why I incorporated them into my book, Building a Just World Order. But I will read it to you. The right to know and the right to access reliable information is an essential component of the national and international democratic order, and finds its legal basis inter alia in Article 19 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, government and private sector secrecy rules, and covers up are enemies of the democratic order. Hence, whistleblowers are necessary human rights defenders because they disclose information about crimes and omissions of governments, transnational corporations, and other non-state actors. Transparency and accountability are crucial to every democratic society and to the rule of law. A charter of rights of whistleblowers is urgently needed, as I proposed in my reports to the Human Rights Council and General Assembly, etc., etc. I won't bother you with reading on this principle number 23. I think it's time to turn to the law on discharge of contaminated water, etc. What is relevant here? Well, quite obviously, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS. And Article 145 is very relevant. I will not read it to you, but I will read Article 192, to which Japan is a party, that says that states have the obligation to protect and preserve the marine environment. And according to Article 194, states should take all measures necessary to prevent, reduce, and control pollution of the marine environment from any source, using the best practicable means at their disposal and in accordance with their capabilities. Now, it's not just a prohibition of polluting the seas. That's obvious. It's the fact that you have a proactive obligation to protect the environment. And that's where this principle of precaution kicks in. That's where the preventive aspect kicks in, because you must by all means avoid irreparable damage. Again, there is state responsibility, both civil and penal. So the discharge of contaminated water into the oceans can entail major violations of the rights of other sovereign states. Certainly, South Korea is concerned, China is concerned, and probably nobody here is aware of the existence of the Ryukyu archipelago, which is right off of China, but which was invaded, occupied by Japan back in 1870, and which was subjugated and annexed, although the Luchu ones had a state. And the Luchu ones had a long history of independence and of relations with Japan and relations with China and relations with other states. So they were just simply absorbed into Japan, although they're not Japanese and they don't speak Japanese, etc. And they too are concerned by the release of contaminated water in their oceans. But of course, they're not being paid any attention by the media. They're being totally ignored. That's why when I'm saying Luchu, most people will look at me and say, what are you talking about? Who are they? Well, there's more than 1 million of them. And they have a right to self-determination too. They're not getting it. And when they vote massively against the expansion of the American base in Okinawa, it's totally ignored by the world. You don't read about it in the New York Times or in the Washington Post about it. And no one in the Human Rights Council gets particularly upset about it. And this is what I'm saying, the great problem of the double standards that we see day in, day out in the Human Rights Council. Of course, ex post facto, you can submit claims against Japan in a number of instances. Obviously, a lawsuit can be filed with the International Court of Justice, with the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, that is based in Hamburg, or you can engage international arbitration, say before the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague for pollution damage compensation against Japan, but that's always too late because the damage then has already occurred. So what we would have wanted to have had is whistleblowers telling us more about why this was done, and also whether other possibilities would have been available. Again, I am a great admirer of whistleblowers like Julian Assange, like Edward Snowden, and not only, I actually dedicated this book, The Human Rights Industry, to the whistleblowers. I will read out to you from the beginning. This book pays tribute to true human rights defenders. Why do I say true human rights defenders? There's a lot of people out there who want to wear the laurels of human rights and call themselves human rights defenders when they're actually in the service of Washington and Brussels, and they're only, towing the line for geopolitical reasons. So I do not necessarily consider those to be human rights defenders. But I write here, I commend the enormous courage of thousands of whistleblowers worldwide, women and men who choose conscience and civic responsibility over personal convenience, risking their lives, liberty, and careers to serve democratic societies and open our eyes to corruption, lies, scams, cover-ups, and crimes perpetrated by governments, corporations, and, not forget, financial institutions. There's a lot of corruption there, and we all suffer from them. Whistleblowers are true heroes of our time and deserve national and international solidarity. Some of them surely merit the Nobel Peace Prize. And I proceed to list 30 of them. Besides Assange and Snowden, obviously, I name among them Bill Binney, Joe Darby, Antoine Deltour, Thomas Drake, Sybil Edmonds, Daniel Ellsberg, the late Daniel Ellsberg, the great Daniel Ellsberg, who passed away 3 months ago, Vera English, Perry Feldwook, George Galatis, Daniel Hale, Ian Henderson, John Kiriakou, Karen Kwiatkowski, Chelsea Manning, Kathy Massier, Samuel Provence, Michael Rupert, Kane Shuley, David Schuyler, Karen Silkwood, Jeffrey Sterling, poor Jeffrey Sterling. I mean, he's really had a rough time, and he made revelations about the CIA Operation Merlin. Linda Tripp, Mordecai Vanunu, Sharon Watkins, Jeffrey Wiegand, Peter Wright. I think it takes time, but I think it was important to name this. And I also quote Eleanor Roosevelt. You know, you may, for the last 14 years, I've been member of an NGO in California, in San Francisco, called Eleanor Lives. And you can check our website, www.eleanorlives.org. And I end my dedication of the book with a quote from Eleanor. Quote, "True patriotism springs from a belief in the dignity of the individual, freedom and equality, not only for Americans, but for all people on earth, universal brotherhood and goodwill," unquote. So in this sense, how are we going to apply that, make that relevant to what is going on right now? Of course, the world is in a state of disorder, very much so. But I don't give up on the International Court of Justice. I've given up on the ICC. But the International Court of Justice right now is seized with this case on the environment, and I'm looking forward to their deliberations. But also they're seized of a case on Israel, on apartheid, on the violations of the rights of self-determination of the Palestinian people. And that is actually a very crucial issue to be taken up. I believe that the Human Rights Committee, as you know, I used to be the secretary of the Human Rights Committee, and I was the chief of the Petitions Department. So if you want, the registrar for the Human Rights Committee, Committee Against Torture, Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, etc. And all of these quasi-judicial bodies, otherwise known as treaty bodies, have produced very good jurisprudence, including on matters of minority rights. We have any number of cases of minorities, actually peoples, in Canada. And every time that the Human Rights Committee took a case concerning so-called First Nations of Canada, I, as the secretary of the committee and as chief of petitions, had the opportunity of drafting for the experts in the committee. And I always put it under Article 1 of the ICCPR, which is the article on self-determination. On the other hand, I got it through in the Lubicon Lake Band case. But the Human Rights Committee also is not necessarily above political pressures. And in the end, they wanted to deal with the rights of peoples, not under Article 1, but under Article 27, which is the article on minorities, as if the First Nations of Canada or the First Nations of Alaska were only minorities, or for that matter, the people, the natives of Hawaii were minorities in their own country or in their own kingdom. I mean, it is really surrealistic the way these matters have been dealt with by the human rights industry. And I am still optimistic because there's a lot of people who agree with me. I can name, among other professors, Richard Falk, whom I very much admire, Jeffrey Sachs, John Mersheimer, Stephen Kinzer, Dan Kowalik, etc. There's plenty of good people in the United States and in Great Britain and in France and in Germany, etc. I mean, the West is not entirely corrupted. It is not entirely sold out to the transnational corporations and to the economy. But as I said, I do not abandon hope that we can make this work and that it will work better. I consider that it's currently dysfunctional, but there are plenty of people who have made concrete, implementable, pragmatic recommendations how to fix it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Alfred. Of course, it's always good to have you and to give some of the legal or the background where law should be in place and practiced, but the rule of law really isn't. I think you brought up something interesting, and that is the question of whether or not the recommendation was merely just that, a recommendation, and it was not an endorsement. I think that in the context of the agreements, that needs to be revisited. Now, this question about Article 1 and Article 27, we specifically in our reports to ICCPR report under Article 1, yet the committee, under pressure, as you say, from the United States, and they come in and they make their deals, they say that, well, we want you to do it under Article 27. And we say no. And there's other NGOs, even students, who wrote down Alaska and Hawaii, and we told them, get them out of there. And this is pushed by ACLU and some of these other NGOs that are trying to reduce the status of our rights. And so this is going to come up, and we're going to bring it up, that you do not have the right to put your puppets, and you say service to others, but no. The issue of puppets under international law is a real issue, and that's something we always have to address. Now, I'm going to move...
I address puppets here.
Okay. Now, I'm going to move to my good friend. Of course, Alaska and Hawaii are working directly together. His Excellency, the Foreign Minister of Hawaii, Mr. Leon Siu, as we are working together on our submission to the ICCPR, and we're hoping that we are heard in the context of Article 1, not Article 27, and that we are treated as high contracting parties. Mr. Leon Siu, glad to have you here.
Aloha, aloha, ia mai o koa e maluhia hoi ke kua. Thank you so much, Ronald, for having me on this panel. This discussion is, of course, not just timely, it's actually long overdue. And the discussion is on the contamination of our ocean. This has been going on again for many, many years. And the ones that have suffered the most from this are the people who live in this ocean. We have been here for millennia, all the peoples of the small islands in the Pacific, as well as, of course, in the Pacific Rim. We just are outraged at the fact that this discharge of contaminated water, and I use the word contaminated, thank you, Hisashi, for pointing that out, this discharge of this contaminated water is going to affect all of us. And it may be small at first, but it is somehow going to affect all of us. And we know this from experience. Like Dr. Desaias pointed out, native peoples in the Pacific were used as experiments for nuclear devices that were set off in the Marshall Islands and in French Polynesia and other places, just to see what the effect might be on people. And we know that the effect was just horrid. And with that, generations later, the people of Marshall Islands and some of those in French Polynesia also are still suffering from the after effects of the nuclear explosions that took place in those places. We are being asked, or we are being told by the government of Japan to trust them to say, and they're saying, well, they're releasing it in quantities that are going to be diluted, and that this will be safe for everyone. Now, how many times have we heard that term? This is going to be safe. Don't worry about it. And we've experienced this many, many times, not only in situations like this, but also in, just additives added to food and treatment of our water and all of these types of things where we're told that this is going to be completely safe. And then months or years later, the product or the item is being recalled because it is not safe. So for a representation by Japan that this treated water is safe for us and it's going to be safe in the ocean, they really don't know that. And most likely they're wrong about that because nothing has been done to actually experiment and to actually test to see the safety of this tritium water being released into the ocean. We're talking about a huge amount of water. Now, if this water is actually safe, then why don't they simply keep it on land? Because apparently it is not safe. They're trying to get rid of it. And they're using the ocean to get rid of this unsafe water. They can't find communities in Japan that would take on building more tanks so that they can actually store it on land. They can't, they don't want to transport it because of the danger it might cause of leaks or accidents and things like that. And so Japan itself is acknowledging that this discharge that they have is not safe. And yet they're trying to tell us that if you put it in the biggest ocean in the world, that it is safe. We are very skeptical about that, and actually we are, as protectors of this ocean, as the people who've lived here for millennia, we do not accept this kind of offhand declaration without any really proof or evidence that this is safe. Now, we've had some close to home experiences with contamination. After World War II, the United States dumped many of the munitions and chemicals and these types of things into the ocean off the islands of Hawaii, thinking that this is going to actually disappear somehow. But years later, now we're talking about 80 years later, we're still having contaminants wash up on shore from tanks or barrels that have leaked, barrels that have deteriorated in the ocean and are now releasing these chemicals. And they're washing up on our surfing beaches and places like that. This is not uncommon. And so any kind of form of trying to use the ocean to store contaminated items or contaminated things, which is a very bad idea. So one of the other elements of this, of course, is consent. We're being told that this is going to be safe for us, but we're not being asked whether or not we consent to this. Recent publications by the Pacific Islands Forum, as I think either Alfred or Ronald mentioned, the Pacific Islands Forum is a consortium of 18 Pacific Island nations, and but their concerns are the same as ours here in Hawaii, because they're saying not enough is known and that it is dangerous and unadvisable to start releasing this contaminated water into the ocean without much being known about it. And so we actually stand in solidarity with that. The Hawaiian Kingdom is preparing a statement very similar to that which the Pacific Islands Forum had released in September of their skepticism. Now, like I mentioned before, we have had recent experiences with contamination, and that is contamination of our drinking water on the island of Oahu. The island of Oahu hosts about 1 million people, and most of the military bases of the United States are located on the island of Oahu. In fact, 22% of the lands of the island of Oahu are dedicated for military use. There is a huge storage facility, a fuel storage facility that was built during World War II, hastily built, by the way. This is a large facility that stores something like 20 million gallons of fuel, and it is hidden under a mountain. And so they dug into the earth and placed these large barrels and then filled them up with large tanks and filled them up with fuel, mostly diesel and jet fuel. And of course, we didn't know about it. This was built in secret during World War II. And it was many, many years later, probably about 50 or 60 years later, that we learned that there are these large fuel storage there. We had been trying to get for many years updates and reports on the integrity of these storage facilities. And of course, the Navy, who runs that storage facility, the US Navy, has basically said, don't worry, it's safe. We've got it all under control. Well, lo and behold, 2 years ago, there have been leaks and contamination into the ground several times. But these tanks are located a mere 100 feet above the main aquifer for the island of Oahu. Now, the aquifer is the underground water that is a lens under each of our islands. This is where fresh water has collected and is stored in the lava rocks and in the porous rocks under the islands. And this is the source of most of our drinking water. And so we have wells that draw water out of these large aquifers. So one of the aquifers, the main one that feeds most of the island of Oahu, was contaminated. The ironic thing was that the part that was contaminated serviced the military bases of Pearl Harbor and Hickam Air Force Base and several of the other military bases. So the ones that got sick, the first ones that responded were the military dependents, the families, and as well as the military personnel that were stationed at these facilities. And of course, the interesting thing was how the US Navy and the authorities treated this. First, they told them, don't worry, we've got it under control. And it's just a minor thing. But people started to get very sick to the point where the US Navy and the Air Force had to evacuate 90,000 people off their bases and into the hotels in Hawaii and then, of course, many of them left to go. But what has happened is that the military personnel themselves, those that were affected and poisoned by these the fuel in their water, are trying to get some kind of compensation and help for these health issues that have arisen that are going to be lifelong health issues for many of them, and some of them are children. So they're trying to get the US government to take care of them in some way, some kind of compensation and consideration made. And the US is playing that same game that they play with us native peoples. Well, we're working on it. It's not that bad. You have to go to our doctors, and our doctors will make the examinations and the determination as to how sick you are, and these types of things. So the military personnel themselves are being treated just like we have been treated for 100 years. That is, we don't matter, and whatever affects us, native peoples, is not the concern of the government. To further that idea that the US government and governments like Japan do not actually, are not concerned with the health of the native peoples, is the treatment that we have undergone for over a century here in Hawaii. And that is the marginalization of our people and the mistreatment, the theft and the destruction of our lands to the point where the wildfires that you saw that happened in, it wasn't a wildfire, but the fire that happened in Lahaina that destroyed the entire town of Lahaina was the result of these poor decisions and these poor policies made by bureaucrats 5,000 miles away who have no clue about what it is like to live on islands. And the destruction that's been caused over 100 years, that was really the trigger. We are saying that the fires in Lahaina were not started on August 8th, 2023. They were started on January 17th, 1893, which was the day that the Hawaiian Kingdom was overthrown. So the imposition of foreign governments who have no sense of responsibility or for a prioritization of the people's needs is what we're stuck with in the Pacific, and what we're seeing being played out with this potentially extremely destructive practice or project by the government of Japan in discharging these contaminated waters. We are used to this type of treatment and this type of inconsiderate policies. And as a result, we feel very justified to not only be suspicious, but to be, to disbelieve what the claims are being made about these discharges by Japan. The other Pacific islands that are going to be affected, of course, many of them much closer than Hawaii, are Micronesia. And as I mentioned before, one of the Micronesian countries, the Marshall Islands, underwent these nuclear detonations in their place. And so they are very particularly sensitive to nuclear manipulations, some kind of coming into contact with other kinds of nuclear contamination. So we just really stand in solidarity with the rest of the Pacific, and we are actually making an appeal to Japan to stop the discharge of the water until, or even maybe never, but until there is actual proof, verifiable proof that the water is actually safe. Without that, we oppose the discharge of these contaminated waters into the Pacific Ocean. I thank you very much. And also, as Ron mentioned, our situation is due to the illegal occupation of the Hawaiian Islands by the United States. Not only are we concerned about the contaminations and about the environmental destruction, but we are concerned that we are a nuclear target in the middle of the Pacific. And some of the other islands like Okinawa are also targets because of the large presence of the United States military. Like I said, 22% of the lands on the island of Oahu is dedicated for military use, not just dedicated, reserved. We're kept off these lands, but for various military use. What has happened is that the United States has created a huge fortress in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, which was similar comparatively at the beginning of World War II, when Japan identified, and again, for their own needs, they identified the need to attack the military bases in Hawaii in order for Japan to succeed with their expansionism in Asia. They needed to take out the US military. Well, that same premise and that same strategy survives till today. Only the enemies, or the so-called enemies of the United States, are much more powerful and much bigger and have much more deadly weapons. But we are still the target. So what we saw that happened on December 7, 1941 was extremely tame and concentrated only on specific military targets compared to the type of warfare that would break out if the United States were to go to war against one of the major powers. And that would mean the annihilation of the island of Oahu, complete annihilation, and it would be unstoppable. We had
Leon, we have 6 minutes or
Okay.
about 8 minutes. So
we had a false alarm in February of 2019, I believe it was, where it was announced through our cell phones. Everybody in Hawaii got this announcement that missiles were on their way. This was during the height of the rhetoric that was going on between Trump and Kim Jong-un in North Korea. So everyone was in a panic because the missile was on the way, and in 15 minutes, those missiles would arrive. It was after, even though it was a false alarm, so thank God everybody was safe. But it was after that that it really sank in that the US had no plans to protect us, the people of the Hawaiian Islands. We are totally at risk of being annihilated should any kind of conflict with a major power break out, and Hawaii would be the first target. So I thank you very much for having me on this, Ronald. Mahalo for organizing this, and to the Geneva Press Club, and to Dr. Alfred Desaias, and to Hisashi Saito. Thank you so much, my friends. Aloha.
Okay, thank you very much, Leon. Thank you for reminding us of, as you sit in the Pacific, in the middle, how vulnerable you are. And as Alfred had mentioned, when he mentioned the currents, I remember talking to Marshall Islands, and they said Alaska is the first one hit by them. And then they come down and they go right in the middle. So we're all affected by that. I would like to see if we have any questions from journalists, either online or here in the room. No? Your comment? Okay.
Yes, please.
Robert James Parsons, independent journalist based in Geneva. I've been tracking ionizing radiation since 1996, so I have some notions of it. First thing is that uranium has a half-life of 4.5 billion years. In order for, that means any quantity of uranium, half of it will decay in 4.5 billion years. For the whole quantity to decay, eventually it becomes lead and it becomes stable. It takes 22 billion years. The solar system is reckoned to be 4.5 billion years old. And the genetic damage caused by ionizing radiation is permanent. It's passed on to subsequent generations until finally somebody dies from it. But in the process of being passed along, it triggers genetic malformations and therefore congenital malformations. In California, on the coast of California in the summer of 2011, there were analyses of fish caught along the coast of California, and they contained radionuclides that were associated with Fukushima, so these particles had already come across the ocean. And there's no reason to believe they're not coming still. The whole Earth is on overload as far as pollutants is concerned, and anything deemed even minor as a form of pollution that adds to it is criminal and horrendous, and that includes dumping this stuff into the water. With regard to the Navy is the world's biggest polluter. Navy is the most powerful element of the United States military. It goes back the farthest. There was a Navy from the outset, even before there was such a thing as an army, even though there was what they called the War Department. They have maintained this dominance, and they are tremendously powerful, tremendously polluting, and one of the areas they have most polluted, along with the area around Hawaii, is the Pacific Northwest. And then with regard to the IAEA, this is quite amazing that Mr. Grossi came out with this statement, because the IAEA has as its mandate the promotion of everything nuclear. Therefore, it's quite shocking to hear him pull back and not, or at least be neutral about this. He is just abandoning all responsibility for any of this. And the IAEA, of course, is under the thumb of the United States, because the United States placed it under the authority of the Security Council. Anything that comes up in the IAEA is controversial, that the United States doesn't want, is referred to the oversight authority. The Security Council is put on the agenda in such a way that then the United States can veto it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert, for your statement. You brought up one of the issues which one of the scientists brought up, is that when the fish consume some of these nucleides, or that they haven't really studied, because if it goes in there and humans consume and the mutations occur. I mean, there's so much we could say about the caution or the precautionary measures that weren't or are not being taken. What you said is, I mean, I could say more, but is there anyone online who has a question?
Yes, we have someone online. Do we take the question? We can, okay. Please, yeah, this is your turn. You can ask your question. We're hearing you.
Hello, hi. Can you hear me? Is my sound
Yes,
working?
loud and clear.
Okay, great. Hi, thank you so much for hosting this conference. Alaska and Hawaii are already suffering devastating environmental damage as a result of generations of colonial occupation and exploitation by the United States. And this discharge of contaminated water could potentially do further environmental damage, as we've heard today. Foreign Minister Su, you've already spoken about this in your remarks, but I'm wondering if you and Ambassador Barnes could please elaborate more on what the impact of environmental exploitation is having right now today on the everyday lives of Indigenous Alaskans and Hawaiian nationals, and what the real impact might be for everyday people if steps are not taken to prevent further pollution without consent.
Thank you very much. I will let Leon start, and thank you for the question.
Yes, aloha, Caitlin. Nice to see you. Yes, the environmental impact of the presence of particularly commercial agriculture and other business interests in Hawaii today, it's tourism, is just devastating, because the amount of resources that are being used is having supported industries like in the agribusiness of pineapple and sugar was just incredible. And they had to destroy our forests in order to create these fields to plant. And we're still feeling the negative impacts of the destruction of our environment in that way. Now we're adapting to it. Now Hawaii has gotten to the position where all of our ag lands most of our ag lands had been transferred into sugar and pineapple. And so that left food raising in a very small a portion of the agriculture in Hawaii. So we started to import our foods from California and from Iowa and other places where they have large farms. Hawaii currently imports 90% of the food that we eat, when we actually have the land in which we could produce all of our food. Hawaii is a very fertile place. However, most of the lands that were used by the sugar plantations and the pineapple plantations use herbicides and pesticides and fertilizers for decades and decades. And as a result, the land has been highly contaminated. There are methods in which we can actually rejuvenate that. We can actually reclaim those lands, and efforts are underway, but it's a slow effort, and we need actually the United States out of the way in order for us to have access to these lands, to replenish these lands, and to rejuvenate the lands so that we can actually plant our own food and once again be self-sustaining. So that's part of the contamination and the effects of the pollution of our Hawaii. Not just our water, but our lands themselves have been polluted and left fallow and left to burn, as we saw in the Lahaina fire. So, mahalo.
Well, I'll briefly respond. The whales that swim in the Pacific Ocean, this affects us all the way up into Utqiagvik, formerly known as Barrow, because they have a quota of whales that they catch for subsistence. Article 1.2 of the ICCPR, in no case may a peoples be deprived of their right to subsistence. And of course, as Pacific Islanders state said, this current goes straight up to Alaska, first from Fukushima. And of course, we have Bristol Bay, where I'm from. I'm born and raised, and come from a fishing family. And after the early 1970s Amchitka blast, the underground testing, people got sick from cancer, and sometimes you saw either holes or sores, some of them very hard, that you cannot explain on some of the salmon or some of the creatures of the sea, I'll say. So this, of course, affects not only those of us, because Alaska is the largest salmon producing, in French you say saumon sauvage, wild stock salmon. And it's the most expensive in the store if you go in any Migros or any store here in Geneva or Europe. So this is deep concern to us. And that's why we assert that we need to be sitting at the table equally as high contracting parties. We need to be in the decision-making process, and we do not need hegemonic gunboat diplomacy. And I use that term gunboat, which was used in the early 19th or 20th century, where they tell us what's good for us, whether we like it or not. And that's what the Pacific Island Forum is saying. Enough is enough. So we want more data, we want more input, we want to have our scientists say what is right or wrong. So thank you very much.
Can I add a footnote to that?
Yes.
The 54th session of the Human Rights Council has just concluded. But of course, we'll have the future UPRs in which these matters might be discussed. But who remembers the outcome document of the 2005 World Summit at the United Nations, Resolution 60/1. Paragraphs 138, 139, responsibility to protect. That is the narrative that I would like to hear from the Human Rights Council and from the General Assembly. We have a responsibility to protect society, to protect the world from ecocide. We have a responsibility to protect the marine environment. We have the responsibility to protect us from war and from the threat of the use of war, and that applies not only to Hawaii, that applies to all of us. And I think it is possible to articulate a different narrative. And I make an appeal to Antonio Guterres to change his tune and to get hold of paragraph 138 of Resolution 60/1 and plead responsibility to protect us from war. Thanks.
We have another online question. We can hear you. It's your turn.
Okay. Yes. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, perfectly.
Okay. Wonderful. So I know that this meeting is full of experts in law and international relations and so on, but from the I have more scientific concern because when we talk about this will eventually contaminate all over the place or see the mutations and so on. But the problem is that we may not see it, and then how to deal with it. Because they do this because they know that they won't be traced so easily. They're convinced. So then they want to create a precedent so that they can keep doing it. And in the future, they will dump worse and worse fraction from Fukushima. And they will dump worse and worse stuff from other nuclear facilities. And not just Japan, but entire world. So at some point, we have to create a very robust scientific argument against it. And then, there should be many different ways. But also, in public, in general, there are such a strong allergic reaction to scientific discussions, and this has to be fixed. So people should be more freely talking about the plutonium that has a half-life of 24,000 years, and the iodine-131 used for the cancer story, and that has a half-life of only 8 days. So there are many, like about the 70 different radionuclides mixed in this kind of water that had a direct contact with a broken nuclear reactor. And then when they compare with other water, like just water and the tritium, and these are the things that only came from secondary, wastewater. So, yeah, unfortunately, once we started this kind of a horrible anti-environmental activities such as nuclear power, then we have to somehow improve the public awareness of this kind of science, and that is inevitable. And climate discussion about CO2 is already in a quite funny direction, and then not everything is very scientific. So, yeah, there must be some improvement done. So, it will be difficult. So we have to watch the similar acts in different locations in the world, and then we have to look at the same substance as the same substance, and what are the conditions, and then we have to have more horizontal view over different type of nuclear issues. And then, so that kind of, I just had a feeling, because this is probably not that they can easily outsmart us. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, with that, I think I will say thank you to everyone. Thank you, Alfred. Thank you, Hisashi Saito. Thank you, Your Excellency, Leon Hsu. And thank you, Geneva Press Club. With that, we end. Thank you.
And thank you, Ambassador Barnes, for your very important and very interesting panelists. Thank you, everyone online too. Thank you for your attention.